dirty
and we're on.
Woo!
Hello, Joy.
This one was gonna be better because
Yeah.
last time was a mess.
Yeah. This is a lot easier to do.
Alright. Should we say our names in letter?
Oh yeah, I did that.
Oh yeah.
Whatever I last took
Okay,
Thursday.
who's A?
I'm Hannah. I'm A.
I'm Corey. I was person B.
I'm Abby. I'm C.
Tristan, and I'm D.
All right.
Cool.
Well, really quick before we dive in too far, sorry guys, did we test that the volume's okay?
Oh.
Well, it was fine the last time.
Okay, cool.
Oh, but like you mean
Like
from
if
this
we're-
distance? I
yeah,
mean,
if we're
it's
talking
see,
loud
it's
enough.
doing that. So
Okay, cool.
I feel like if we're talking that up, I could close this so in case
Just
that
a bus.
Outside
Sounds
noise.
smart, yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. We should be fine though,
But then
Cool.
there's no one in the library.
because it's
Yeah, we could
it's
just-
detecting it. So I'm
Cool.
assuming that it will work fine then.
Yeah.
So
Alrighty.
Okay.
a good call.
Well, we have quite a bit to talk about.
Yeah, we do.
Oh my goodness.
What
Plenty.
shall we start with?
Should we start with just our individual jigsaws about because I feel like that's pretty quick.
Yeah, we can do that.
And then dive into the books we actually read.
Yes.
Mhm.
Just kind of get this one. So
Well,
Okay.
I had chapter 7, and that kind of covered all the different categories of picture books.
Mhm.
And it was, as you probably read in mine, it just was really straightforward of like what each are. And
Yeah.
most of them I knew what they were, but it was still like good to get an overview of what the differences were. And it wasn't like the descriptions of them weren't like, I don't know. It didn't really relate to like the rest of, like, it was just like, here it is. This is what it is. Kind of probably like chapter 9 was too, with just like what
Mhm.
graphic novels
Yeah,
are. So
just kind of like learning about them.
yeah, but
I thought the one thing was the engineered books. I had never heard of that like title.
No.
Yeah,
engineered
I knew what
I
they
have
were,
them.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
like the pop-up books and
Yeah.
stuff. Like,
yeah, but I never knew that's what they
Yeah,
were
they were
called.
just like that physical
Yeah.
activity. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, those have a name instead of just pop-up books or
Yeah.
something like
It's
that.
interesting because like the sliding ones or like the tracing ones, I never really thought about them as being like, oh, the kids are learning like, what are those called? Like motor skills. and
Yeah,
stuff,
like the
using
fine
those.
motor
Yeah,
skills. Yeah.
Mhm.
I just thought they were fun.
Yeah, when I initially went through there, I was just like writing down what they were, but then it said to like how to critique or what's the right criteria when looking for them. And so I found that interesting in
Yeah.
chapter 7, like what criteria you want to follow. Some of them had specifically like, oh, be looking for this, not this,
Mhm.
and others didn't. So that was informal.
Yeah.
I wrote down just one question after reading through that chapter really quickly, kind of for the author, and I was just like, oh, well, in that like introductory paragraph, they mentioned how picture books are not just for children, but for all learners. But then they didn't really dive into it for the rest of the chapter. Like it was all about how picture books are for young learners.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I would have liked to have seen, because I know in some of our ELL classes we've talked about how incredibly powerful picture books and like
Mhm.
wordless books and stuff can be for children who are still learning the language. And I was like, oh, I wish they had talked more about that and how you could use these different kinds of picture books in different ways with
Mhm.
older students.
Yeah,
Definitely.
It's also, I think, like challenge to, because when you think of a picture book, you think of like a young, like, you know, younger elementary. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I don't know, for me, I want to teach older elementary. So like when I
Same.
look at a picture book, I think of
Ways.
how I could like incorporate into
Yeah.
older elementary,
Yeah.
like, and what you could do with it and everything. And so,
Mhm.
but you know, my knowledge is pretty limited in terms of like the broad scheme of like everything.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I agree. I think it would have been helpful to see, but then that chapter would have been massive.
Yeah.
To like,
Could have been. I know. I am like always surprised by like how straightforward and like short the chapters can be, or the sections, I guess, like
Mhm.
that we're supposed to focus on. Go.
yeah,
It's a really good focus.
Yeah.
Point.
Yeah. It's broad, and I mean it's not broad, but it's a good overview
Mhm.
of things.
yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Then chapter 9.
That was me. So that was talking about the different kinds of folktales and folklore, and then it asked what to look for when selecting them, but I found that the chapter didn't really talk about that.
Mine didn't
So
talk about my question either.
I was just like, okay, so I had to extrapolate a little bit. The chapter did dive into like the values of using folklore with young learners, which had to do with, you know, using their imagination, identifying emotionally with characters,
Mhm.
and kind of developing a sense of self-worth and hope for a better outcome even when things are really difficult. So I talked about that. I don't feel like I had any questions after reading that though.
Yeah.
One question I did have was like, what's a good balance for children when they read fantasy versus like real world books, or like, because they talked about like the fear that parents have or that teachers have or something of like when kids read fantasy, just only fantasy, and like, you know, how they're like, oh, well, it damages their psychological like awareness of like what's real and what's not and everything. And so I was just like, I don't know, that was an interest to me of like, okay, well, you have a kid that's so interested in fantasy, like how do you say like, okay, now you need to read this book or something, and that makes them more reluctant to read? Or
and I wonder if there is like, I don't know if it talked about that, I don't remember it talking about that, but like if there's an age like that you want to introduce or like find that okay for them to read, like so that they're not like still in the process of understanding like concepts and what's real and what's not. I don't know, like
it kind of went like, and I found myself questioning this, like the same type of thing with the graphic novels too, was like, okay, well, what's a balance? Like how do you know what a balance is between you know, a kid who's so enveloped into a graphic novel and only reads graphic novels? How do you transition them to real, or do you need to? I mean, like, or will they like get
that
there
video,
on their own?
One guy didn't seem to really think so, but the other woman was like,
right.
Except I was confused because she seemed to be like, oh, you can start with graphic novels, but then move on to novels. But I think it could be like interchangeable. Like, you don't have to like stop reading graphic novels because you're moving on to novels. Like, it's not a stepping stone. It's just another type of reading.
Although it can be.
It can be a stepping stone. Yeah, like the guy who learned how to read.
Right.
Reading comics.
Only like, I feel like it can be, classified as a stepping stone if they are like really uninterested in reading
or
at all,
they're learning English
or English, because that it's not such a huge like challenge.
Otherwise,
for them
it's just another type of book,
right? Just like fantasy,
right?
Because you're not going to just stop reading fantasy, but then how do you like? I mean, is it bad to only read fantasy?
Well, I know as a kid, I only read fantasy for a really long time, and then I only read historical fiction for a really long time. And it's like, I don't know, I would pick one type and read only that. And I still grew into other genres.
Right.
I think that goes back to the point, I don't remember which video it was from anymore, but somebody in some interview said that avid readers are gonna naturally move on to other genres, like just because they find something they don't understand and they have to go look up, well, what is this? And you know, in our day and age, it might not be, you know, turning to a nonfiction book, but it might be, you know, reading an informational article online to learn really quick about something they didn't know about. And so I thought that was really cool. And like you were saying, even if they focus on one genre for a while, like avid, if you're encouraging students to be avid readers in general, then they're gonna learn to want to explore just because their natural curiosity will be piqued.
And like someone said in that graphic novel video, like if it's don't read it all versus only read graphic novels, then yes, of course, read only graphic novels. So I guess if it's like that, like if it's not read it all or only read fantasy, then read fantasy because it's
right. And I felt like too in the chapter when they were talking about like why people fear or like shy away from having kids read fantasy is because of, it was like this psychological fantasy where they like lose touch with realities in life, the violence and frightening for young children. And then like it's a waste of time. Yeah. And so like I was like, well, that seems very like that's one kid, you know, like
and like what movies are these kids watching that have violence and like all that same stuff? And the video games they're playing, like why does it change if it's a book?
So and like books, they can limit themselves with their imagination
exactly.
too. They don't have to imagine the absolute worst that maybe an adult might imagine from more life experience.
And maybe that's why adults think that, because they have so much more life experience. They're probably thinking about like the worst thing that they can think of, which is not going to be the worst thing a child can think of.
Right. I just think like for as a teacher, like do you need to balance that, or do you need to like
I mean,
You know?
as a teacher, I feel like we give them plenty of opportunities to read different types of books.
Yeah.
And we're reading different types of books to them because we're going to go through different
Units.
exactly.
Mhm.
So we're giving them that already.
Yeah.
Whatever they read at home is what they're going to be interested in.
Yeah, I agree.
And as for them worrying about the negative impacts of books that they could have on children, if parents are that concerned about what their kids are reading or what movies they're watching or what video games they're playing, then the best way to help with that is to engage in conversation about it and be like, well, okay, what part of this was real? What part of this wasn't real, right?
Mhm.
And so you
That's
can
true.
always,
That's
Yeah,
a good
kind of
way
take
to
like a
check.
step back.
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
I get it.
For
Cool.
sure.
And then what did you do?
Mine was on the comics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
This is
so
on
it
the
was the
history of it, right? Yeah.
history of the comics, which was pretty interesting. It's really like gone through like twists and turns.
Oh my goodness. Oh no. What? Okay.
We'll just have to put them together.
Yeah. Okay, that was weird. Why? We already. Oh.
I
So
think it's still going.
it's open.
Oh.
Is the image different?
Did it just freeze?
Okay.
Oh.
Are we
Okay.
back?
That was weird.
That was weird. Okay, I'm gonna turn that off really quick.
Oh, it was just
I had to
really
get it for
different.
IT. That was stupid. Okay. I don't know how to do that though.
Just go back.
It's on right now. It's still broadcasting.
Okay.
Let's just keep talking then.
Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Oh, here
so-
we go. Yeah, keep talking.
Yeah, so mine
So
was the
weird.
comics. And just like how it started, and it was pretty interesting because it started in the 1700s. It was like the first published cartoon, and it's all very European based. The United States really like just like kind of caught on to them like in the 1800s, and in the late in the late 1800s even, because they were inspired by the European publications, and like the first one was in 1700, but there's like the one comic strip or whatever.
That's crazy.
And so yeah, it was pretty interesting because like kind of get the ball rolling and everything in the late 1800s, and then in the early 1900s, that's when the superhero comics came out.
Yeah.
And that is pretty interesting because of how much impact World War II had on comics, and comic strips, because like before the war there was like superheroes, and then during the war, of course, they wanted like this ideal like Superman,
like Captain America.
right.
Yeah.
And then after the war, it really changed who was the superhero and like how people interacted and everything. Like it went, superhero comics like continued to, like there's like this huge boom of comics after the war, but they were more of a science fiction origin instead of a magical thing, which I thought was really interesting because it kind of was just like the war like shocked society into be like, okay, it's not really about magic anymore, it's about like the
what
science
can we
fiction
scientifically actually do in reality.
right. Yeah. And just like, they went from Superman to Spider-Man. Like that was kind of like the shift of it all. And then I don't know how you say it. It's like the comic with the X, like comics. It's like
I
what
think
it
it's
is.
pronounced the same way.
It's
Comics,
comics. Okay.
Just with the next.
Okay. Never. But that was like the X-rated content, and that was really popular in like the hippie movement in the 1960s and 70s. And then that's when they started the I don't know, me either. They started what is it called, the Comic Code Authority? Yeah, Comics Code, which pretty much just like laid the ground of like what can be published in comics, and so obviously the X-rated content was not in this code, but they still continued to publish it, and it's like super popular with adults to this day and everything.
Never heard of it.
Yeah,
I know. Neither.
Yeah, and he like there was this guy that led one of the fights, and due to his expertise, sorry, I'm transitioning, but he wanted graphic novels and comics to be in bookstores and everything. And so that was in the early 2000s that he kind of just wanted this like literary acceptance of comics and graphic novels and stuff. And so anyways, there's a huge push for that. And then the Japanese manga. Yeah, so that was also doing a flip, which was super interesting because at the same time as he's fighting for this like literary acceptance in bookstores and having them sold, the Japanese manga figured out a way to print more copies for a lot less money. And so like this Hassler guy used that as like a selling point because he's like, oh, well, you're going to make so much profit because you can get so many of these for so cheap and then you're going to sell them for this amount. And
Interesting.
yeah. So anyways, that was kind of like the evolution of comics and then into graphic novels because graphic novels were more of like the late 90s. And
That's exciting.
Retro. Yeah, so mine was just kind of like the trends of graphic novels. And then another question was like, how do you read them? But it wasn't really in the article. So I kind of like thought about all the stuff that I like read from the other graphic novel website and from the video. And I just kind of talked about how like graphic novels and comics like kind of talked about in the trends how they're different and how like the comics are more like the superhero stuff that's just like stapled together and it's like a little quick story, whereas the graphic novels are a full book just like written in comic form. And I was talking about how graphic novels, like how comics have become way more popular now with technology as well because now you can make them online, so then more people can be making them and getting them published because you don't have to go you don't have to be an artist to do it. You can like make it online. And it's just like making ways for anyone to publish it because it's just like on the internet. And also it kind of talked, I don't know if it talked about I read it somewhere else, but it kind of talked about how like graphic novels are becoming really popular right now for young students in schools, like Calvin and Hobbes, or those are like comics type of reading. And then how some people are kind of worried that like reading a graphic novel isn't really reading because it's like looking at pictures more, but how like students are still learning different skills when reading a graphic novel, and you're still using a lot of the same skills that you use when reading like just a basic novel. But really this mostly just talked about like that article's portion on trends really just talked about like online, like make like how you can do it online.
Well, that, I mean, it kind of, leads into like the graphic novels video, which I thought was really interesting. And it was like a really cool interview because it had a lot of different points of view.
Yeah. Of course, the one guy who was a graphic novel author was
he's like, they're the best thing ever.
He had to be biased otherwise.
Probably
like, why are you?
But to counter him, they had the novelist who's like, oh, only novels are fine literature.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
I really liked what that one guy said. The other one who wasn't either of those two people. At the end when they're like, oh, what advice would you give? And then he said that the parents and teachers should read them so that they understand like the metacognition that you go through when reading
your
it.
Children and what they're reading.
And that was really interesting to me because then like when because I had read half of this and then I watched the video and then I read the other half of it and I like really was paying more attention to like what I do while I'm reading the graphic novel, and it was really interesting like how my brain worked a little bit differently but also like really similarly to when I am reading a novel, and I thought that was interesting.
Sometimes the bubbles like mix me up.
I
don't know.
I'm
like, wait a minute.
Sometimes I want to read straight down. Instead of to the right. And then I'm like, I feel like it engages me more than in a novel, because in a novel I'm just like reading, and I'm like, oh wait, what did I just read? Whereas in this I have to pay attention. I'm like, from here,
easier to check out.
Here.
I felt a little bit overwhelmed just because I've never really read any graphic novels at all. And then I jump into like, this. And
yours is really like, mine is more like little boxes.
This was just like all together, over the place, and it was just like, which is awesome. But it was just like, I felt very like overwhelmed, and I felt like I spent so much time on each page because I was like, I wasn't just reading the words, but I'd read the words, look at the picture, go back to the words, and just like kind of like you have to make that
like sandwich of
Connection.
everything.
And you have to think like that's what the students are doing too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
whatever you're doing.
I know, it made me, I mean, that advice that the guy said to like invite the parents to read, the teachers to read graphic
Yeah.
novels and stuff, because it, you know, they haven't been a thing and they're becoming more and more of a popular thing.
And parents are probably just thinking it's like a comic book, and they're like,
Right.
that's not real reading. Like that's a comic book,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny reading all three of you who are kind of new to graphic novels. Oh, this is tricky. I've been reading them for years. I love graphic novels. So like I tore through that book in less than an hour, and I read that one too, just because I had them both.
Yeah.
It took me a while. I was like,
Yeah, that one did take me longer. There was a lot of history in that one.
oh yeah,
that was
I
hard
like kept
dig
having to
through.
figure stuff out. I was like, wait, how does that tie to that? Like, that was confusing.
But I liked one of the suggestions in the essay about comic history and trends. At the end, they had that example of a response that an author had done in comic form to a graphic novel that they had read. And that was really cool for me to see, because that's something I actually did in high school after reading one of my first graphic novels in a school setting. We had to do a 2-page comic response of like how we processed. And it was, I don't know if you've heard of it, Mouse is a graphic novel. It's a short series of 3 that details a son interviewing his father about his experience in the Holocaust.
Oh wow.
And it's really, really heavy. So we had to like make our own response to that. And it was crazy because that essay was talking about the process that artists go through of having to sketch and plan, and what words do I want to include, what images are the most important. And in doing that kind of like reading response in graphic form, I had to go through that whole process too of like, well, what do I want to highlight about what was important to me and stuff.
Have you read Bone? Well,
I haven't read Bone, but
Okay.
I really want to now.
I kind of want to read it.
Yeah.
He was really adamant about Bone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's like, Bone's the best.
Yeah.
It sounds like something I'd love.
Yeah. He was like, oh, it sounds silly. And I'm like, silly, yes.
I had a couple questions too, just because I haven't, read a whole lot of graphic novels, and I'm just thinking of like, I'm inexperienced, which I can become more experienced in it, but teaching is right around the corner, and so I was
money questions. Are these gonna be for Joy?
Potentially, I don't know. Corey might be the expert, but one of them was that like how to increase the level of language with comics and graphic novels. So I was thinking like, if they talked a lot in like the interview and everything about how like kids can make their own graphic novels and comic strips and everything, but like how do you like shift them to like using more what's the word, like better language or like higher level of language,
designated like vocabulary words, or like like if you're reading, for instance, fantasy, we learned that fantasy has really high level words in it. So if you're reading like a fantasy unit and you can like highlight some of those leveled words, and they can use them in their graphic novels.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, like while Corey was talking, like just like analyzing a graphic novel takes a lot of like why did the author use that question
that
or that picture or something, like and just like that just seems like such a huge teaching task, like not task, but maybe just like a like it's just like an overwhelming thought for me to be like, how do I like take this, analyze it with a kid, and then be like, okay, you go try to do it, like and like what topic do you do that on, so that it's like applicable for them, and obviously that would depend on grade, but it's just kind of like I don't know, my inexperience of just like not knowing.
Yeah, it's becoming such a huge like hype in school, and so I feel like we do kind of need to prepare for that being like something that we teach on, and that the attention of our kids, because they love it. And
and also like the boy readers versus girl readers, because they briefly talked about how
because she was like, it's good for the boys to read, and I was like,
I got that too, and then he brought it up at the end. I'm like, hey, I saw that too.
Because it's true. Like, I mean, I don't think I've really ever seen like a girl, like a third grader or something, reading a graphic novel. It's always been like the boys that read them, which that's just like how boys and girls are such different people in literacy. Like,
especially at that young of an age.
Yeah. So I don't know, like
I don't know, if you're having the kids make their own graphic novels, like how do you apply it so that it's like manageable for both?
Mhm.
You know, you have these boys typically that are, you know, very into graphic novels, or, you know, you have a couple kids, and then you have some kids that are just like, I have no idea, you know, more like me. I'm like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
So I don't know, just like,
I feel like that should be a muddy.
how do you expose each gender like more equally, or like make up for,
Or just
like
like
each
maybe even
need?
all students, just in general.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's kind of like with anything though. Some are gonna have more background knowledge than others.
That's true. Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, as for like how you could analyze them in class too, I feel like that's where a lot of our arts integrated classes would come in, and taking a look at the use of line and color and light and dark and what's in the foreground, background, all of that stuff. But I still agree that this is a pretty muddy question, because like I don't know how I would adapt like typical literacy analysis conversations for a graphic novel, because it is primarily dialogue instead of having all this other information that you're getting from the
like from a novel you would have like very descriptive, because you don't have those pictures for support, and so like that's where a lot of new vocabulary could come in, is where you're having to describe something and then imagine it. And I don't know, I just feel like that's the job in graphic novels of covering that. And so obviously if you're looking at a graphic novel picture, you're not going to see the same word in the conversation that you're seeing in the picture, you know? So like, how do you incorporate, or how do they go about incorporating that richer vocabulary?
Yeah, after we read the like how to analyze a picture book thing, I kind of went back through this and tried reading it with like, not the whole thing, but like looking at only the pictures and then looking at only the words, which was really hard to look at only the words because they're like in the pictures. But I was definitely reading it without looking at the pictures, and I was like, wow, this is super choppy, and it's like doesn't make any sense. Like, I mean, it does make, like, I understand what's happening, but it doesn't sound good.
It's a totally different way of writing.
Completely different, because when the pictures are in there, it fills in all the gaps that you don't realize are missing in the words. And I was like, whoa, that's so crazy. And like with this too, this book, I had to figure out that like, if the line was here, it meant like this is just like information she's filling you in on, whereas the speech bubbles are what people are saying. And then like this line might be like a background on history, or just like a statement that happened, and then that's just what it is. And
they even have those lines of information in that one.
Yeah, this one's
just bubbles.
But it's also interesting because it plays more on like the colors. So like this one goes back, and you know, there's like the black background pages, which has meaning, and then there's like the white background
I found
pages.
that those were usually when traumatic events was happening.
More intense times.
Yeah, this was really interesting.
That is
and
interesting.
It's crazy to think that like the authors like think through that.
That like.
But it's also then it's like I was thinking like, okay, well maybe you have a kid draw a wordless book and then add the words, like, you know, instead of doing it simultaneously, and or do you go about it in like a comic strip way?
Because then that
and
might
then
be a
develop
little,
it into a graphic novel.
Because that could be confusing though if you're like, oh, we're gonna focus on wordless books, and now we're gonna work on writing, and now we're gonna turn that into a graphic novel. Like that might be a lot.
Like a little,
Then they might think that all wordless books are supposed to turn into graphic novels.
Yeah.
Well, and then it's like, you know, they talked about in the interview of technology too, and we talked a little bit about how like with technology more and more graphic novels are being published because it's a lot easier. But then it's like, well, now you can incorporate the technology piece into like teaching kids, and that's just like one more thing.
I did that in IT, and like I did that as one of my things in the IT class, because we were doing stories, and then instead of doing just like a story, I did like a comic strip. But then like comic strips are different than graphic novels.
They are, because it's a book instead of just like a, you know, what you're talking about, like a
little
thing.
Clips. A little story. Like TV show versus movie.
Right, exactly.
Before we move too far, I feel like we should write down there's two muddy questions that just
Okay.
happened there. There was the one about
403. Sorry.
how can you, how would we phrase it? Like how can you use literary analysis on the text in graphic novels?
Yeah, that.
And then the second one, I feel like, let me know if I'm summing this up right for you, Abby, but like, how can you expose children to different genres, including like graphic novels and wordless books, and still have them understand the differences and be able to, I don't know, create them or
Could you
Yeah.
now see the pencil?
Can you,
Yeah.
sorry.
Got it.
I think both of those wordings would make sense.
And it's
Especially
like
when she hears our
33
conversation.
minutes between 30 and 33, so we talked about it.
Then we should move on to. We want to talk about
more.
What?
I was just talking to
Do we want to talk next about Marisol McDonald, or do we want to talk about the power stuff? I think we're kind of right now talking a little bit about analyzing picture books, so maybe we should continue with our Marisol McDonald and the other ones that we
chose.
the fantasy one or the full story one. I mean, I just went too long with her.
Yeah.
I also just want to talk about the power.
Yeah.
And
That's a pretty hefty section.
The power.
oh, I'm gonna talk about my mirrors and windows a little bit with these since we're talking about the books already. And you can obviously read this on here, but I just found this interesting because like when I was reading it, I was like, oh my goodness, how am I gonna like see a mirror in this? Like her life is completely different than mine, and I know we talked about this in class before, but like she's growing up in Iran during the like wars, the revolutions, and it's just like a lot, like people dying, constantly being in fear of your life, having to decide whether or not you're going to stay in your home or leave, and like just so much. I was like, I cannot relate to that at all. But there was like this one part where she has her uncle, and her uncle is telling her stories about like their family because she wants to like hear stories about her family being heroes and stuff. And like that is the one mirror I could find, is just being like, oh, I feel like I want to know stories about my family. Like a lot of people do. Like you want to hear the back, like where you came from, like what people in your past have done in your their lives. And so like that was my mirror for that. But like the rest of it, I was like, I don't know. The rest honestly is a window, because I can't imagine like being in her shoes. And like she was constantly, she's just a kid, but she was constantly rebelling against them. Like she would wear her hair out of her veil, which as a statement, like she would listen to illegal music, wear illegal clothes, and I was like, I could not do that. Like even if I disagreed with the government, there's no way. I would be way too scared to do that. And she was just a kid, and she did all that, and I just thought that was really amazing.
I think when you have a book that is so different than your life, like just totally different. I think that challenge of finding yourself in it is like such a good challenge to do, because I think that like I find in myself of when I read a book that's so different, and that not that I'm disconnected from the book, but I don't try to put myself there, because I'm like, that's not like that's I can't put myself in those shoes because I have no background in it, and like you know, you don't feel like kind of just doing that, because it's just like you can imagine it, but that you can't ever experience it. Like, and so I think it's like a really cool balance to, or like maybe not a balance, but just like try challenge and exercise, to like find yourself. Because even like in this one, I mean, this is dealing with the civil rights movement and everything. It's like
completely different time.
Time and everything. Like I can't imagine what that would be like, because that
weren't there.
It makes me think too about like how we like feel challenged, or when we're reading that, like we like have to think more about it, and like it just reminds me of like all those that like for so long with children's book, how most of them are all like, I don't know, the typical like white representation within, and like it's just interesting to think about how like there's probably so many kids that would read those and feel that same way that we're feeling when we're reading like multicultural books and stuff, and they've been feeling that way forever, where it's like that's their normal. I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting take.
I like this exercise too for using with kids, because I feel like a lot of times when kids are like hearing a story, reading a story, if they don't relate to it, they like check out. Like they're like, well, I don't understand this. Like I'm not like part of this, so like I'm not like gonna listen. Because like whereas we know to like, okay, like I can still read this story even though I don't understand it. Like I'll try my best. Like I feel like they're just like, I don't know. I can't like they can't imagine it at all, because they don't even have enough. Like we at least have been in school long enough to like know the history and like see some stuff on the news, or like at least I can imagine some of this, or meet more people, but they might have no background knowledge at all to be able to relate it to.
That's true.
Yeah, and well, when you don't connect with something, it's a lot harder to put yourself in that.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of just like I don't know. I think of it as like, you know, when somebody's like, it's totally different, but like when somebody's like mean to you, you don't have any interest in like pursuing them as a friend, typically, because they, you know, you didn't put you in a spot to like befriend them or something like that. And so it's like, you know, if a book is totally different than your life, you're like, well, I don't know, like I can't imagine myself there, like, and so you kind of just like, not that you disconnect, but you just don't necessarily engage in it as much. So
that's where I see the value of the mirrors activity, because like you can teach students that it can even be really small moments. Like in both of these, I didn't write about it, but it just occurred to me. They both have moments where the family has a party, and just like watching in the silence of our friends, they're like playing the music and singing loud, and the kids are dancing. And in Persepolis, they're like, screw the rules, we're still gonna dance and like drink our wine, and if the police come, we'll flush it down the toilet.
And then I can't relate to that, but I can relate to my parents drinking wine.
Like just
or like having a party, like
everyone's celebrating together. Like you can connect to really little moments too.
Definitely.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. Well, in
Marisol.
Marisol, is that how you say it?
Marisol. I've been saying Marisol McDonald.
Marisol.
She is adorable, first of all.
I
Most of
know.
the illustrations are so cute. Did you see like the Spanish words in
I was like, is that newspaper?
articles?
Like, is there? I was like trying to understand what that might mean for more meaning. And there's even like in this page, it's English though, or it's English. So it like, it was curious, like, what is the representation of that, or like this.
Or like even they have
this is English and Spanish,
and they have their like notes on the fridge in
Spanish.
Spanish, you know, like
And
this
then
family speaks Spanish. I don't know.
In the classroom, what page is it on? All the books in the background, this page, it's all in English. I don't know. I just like was trying to like find the details in the illustration and try and think about like what they represent, and I don't know. I just found that. I don't know. It was pretty fair. Like,
I think this author and the illustrator, they're two different.
Yeah.
I think they committed so much to the doesn't match part.
Yeah.
And I loved that because
it.
I mean, if you look at it, there's animals on every single page. Like, and they're just like weird little animals. Not weird little animals, but there's just like animals put in different spots, and it's just like that doesn't match. Like that doesn't. You know, it doesn't fit. You know, like when they're in the kitchen, there's a pig on the table, and you know, as like the salt and pepper shaker, and like a cow, and there's a llama on the fridge.
Like,
and,
why?
You know, like it just doesn't
cool.
match.
I just love it. So
And like I don't know, in this there's a bird hanging out of the backpack, like and stuff. I don't know. I just like once I saw that, I was just or like these birds. One of them's completely yellow, and one of them has the newspaper writing on it. Like they just like don't match.
That's interesting.
Also, look how cute it is that they even have like the kids' shoes untied and like a rip in the knee and like a band-aid.
Yeah,
they
and
really
like
paid attention to the details.
That zipper thing,
Yeah.
like with
But
and even the pant legs are different. Like different. Oh, never mind. That's not true.
But I
just loved how it was like so committed to this, like things don't match, like things.
I remember her at the beginning of. I remember Joy saying like, "Oh, not all the books we choose are going to be like, you know, good ones. But you're going to have to figure out which ones are which." And so I read this. I was like, I love it so much. And I was like, wait. Go back and like really look at it. Like, is it not as good as I think it is? I couldn't find anything though.
No, I love it.
I like did the thing again where I like looked at only the pictures and only the words. Or I think I only looked at only the pictures for this one. And because it's like, well, you're critically looking at it, so like, do the pictures tell a story? And at first, I was looking through it, and I was like, I mean, they're just pictures, honestly. Right now, like, they don't really show anything. And I was like, oh no, like I'm sad. Maybe like it's not as good as I thought it was. But then as I like continued, you can kind of like see. With just the pictures. Yeah, at first you're just like, okay, she's a kid, she plays, she's wearing a crazy outfit, she likes art, she's like playing with kids. But then as soon as you get to this page, this is kind of when you like figure out what's happening, and then you're like, oh wait, now she's sad, all wearing the same, and then like sad again, all wearing the same, talking to a teacher, still sad, and then she like gets happy for some reason. We don't know why yet if you're just looking at the pictures. And then bam, she's herself again, and her whole family is smiling and happy, and she's happy. And then I just feel like the pictures do show the story, but not until a little later. Like you don't know that's happening yet.
Yeah, I think you have to like read through it with the words first, and then go back and look at the pictures only, because when you go back and look at the pictures, you can see how much stuff like doesn't match, and like how she's like comfortable in her own skin, but continuously she gets like less and less like okay with it.
And I love how even like the font is mismatched, and how like having English and Spanish is mismatched.
Yeah, no,
Like-
I loved that.
And I do, like, I was kind of talked about this in my post about how, like, if you're reading this type of book, one has the Spanish on one side and English on the other, either you can, like, learn how to speak Spanish, and you can do both if you have Spanish-speaking kids in your class, or you could have a Spanish-speaking student come up and help you read these parts to the class. And then also it's just available in your classroom for students who, like, they can read this, see the pictures, and, like, connect it to the English words. And, like, I know that I've known that there's books like this, but I haven't found one that I like liked as much as this one.
I had one question after reading this book. I remembered that one of the things looking at in last week's readings was the idea if there was like the 3 different levels of cultural inclusivity. And like the base one was where you see like in a classroom of students, there's one token child of each race or each culture. And I noticed that in this classroom because like her 3 friends, she has one girl who's Afro-American, one Asian friend, one white kid.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if that's like problematic or if that's just like that base level of inclusivity, but it's like they're still like showing like stereotypical physical features.
That's true.
I wasn't sure about that part.
I know, I noticed that as well, and I wasn't like sure what to think of it, if it was like a good thing or
There's other, like, I don't know, because there's her cousin and her brother, and they look really similar.
I thought at first they were the same the first time I read it.
Yeah.
I was like, wait,
So
what? Are
there's
they?
that.
Yeah,
So that's one thing.
that's
That's the same kind of thing you're talking about.
That's a good point. That
Yeah.
isn't.
But it's also, I think, like as you were asking the question, I was thinking, like looking at this page, like there's, you know, kind of one of everyone, that it continues, like, and maybe I'm just more hung up on this, but like it continues the idea of like people not matching, like people not being the same.
Yeah.
And so maybe like that was the reasoning behind putting the different ethnicities.
I think that I want to ask that as a muddy question. Like, was this usage of all the different cultures, like culturally
Sound
inclusive, or was it
harmful?
Yeah.
Was it maybe being only used to match the theme of the story
like,
of
or
being
was it
mismatched?
stereotyping?
Okay, I'll write that down.
Because the
We're
most,
at 47 minutes roughly.
like, I guess they didn't have like they didn't make them all look the same, which is good. But if you do notice, there's like 4 different kids that are white, and 1 Asian and 1 African American, and
That's a good point.
like white.
So yeah, white is still
White,
overrepresenting.
these are different kids, and there's 4 different white kids that I count.
But then you could also look at like the boy-girl
ratio
too, and I think that's pretty even in
The what ratio?
boy-girl ratio.
Oh, the boy-girl ratio, yeah, is even, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought it was interesting too, because you could dive into like, you know, why is it a girl that feels like that? You know, that's her clothes and her look and her,
That's a good point.
like, you know.
In
I
this
think
world,
that was a
it is,
very
like-
purposeful choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I remember being her age and wearing hecka
Yeah.
clothes.
Like,
No one ever made fun of me. Everyone did that.
That was like so
So-
common.
But I did write in my thing that this was written in 2011, so I don't know if things have changed from the early 2000s. Like maybe now, I guess when I'm in the classrooms, I don't really notice the kids don't really wear like crazy
Crazy.
mismatched clothes.
Yeah.
I read that comment of yours and I really liked it because, yeah, I feel like another part of that with what you were saying about it, because Marisol is a girl and because of that technological influences on children now, she's got a lot more images that she's probably being exposed to and comparing herself to whether she wants to or not.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think this story has like a really good like moral and message and takeaway and everything, you know, kind of just like be you, doesn't matter what other people say, like, you know.
Even the end, she gets a puppy. That was so random.
I know. I was like,
I know. Now let's go get a puppy.
because you were yourself.
Yeah.
Pat on the back.
But she did ask for it at the very beginning.
Yeah, it's true.
So it like wrapped it up.
Yeah. But I think that like it is a good moral. Good.
Yeah.
Like,
I definitely. Yeah. Also, I just love the illustrations.
Because I think, I don't know, I think this would be a good book too to use at different age levels and take away different points from this book and emphasize different points. Because, you know, when you're like in 4th grade, 5th grade, you're starting to become more sensitive of like physical appearance and everything. And so it's just like, this would be a really good like awareness of just like, you know, it doesn't matter what other people think, like you need to be yourself. And then, you know, you could take it as, you know, 1st, 2nd, 3rd or something like that and do more of like accepting others that may be different than you were. You know, you could take like different.
Yeah. But also the thing about having kind of back to like the different cultures in each of all the students, this also is like a way for other students to see themselves in the story. So like if I was an African American girl, then I'd be like, oh, there I am. But then there's not African American boy, Asian girl, like.
Yeah, and I wasn't even
like
sure if it was a problem because the book wasn't choosing to focus on those students.
No,
like if it was focusing on those students and there was just one of each and they were just very much the stereotype image, then it might be more of a problem.
Yeah.
But because it's focusing on her soul and her experiences, and she's the character with the most detailed, like, everything. Like, she has the most detailed eyes, even on this page. Like, you can see they gave her way more detail versus every other character basically just has the pupils.
That's
true.
Yeah,
they put more detail so your eyes kind of like go straight to her. And it's also, you know, they're emphasizing the point of having multiracial parents too, and everything.
It's a cute family.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it would be different if it was, you know, a white girl from a white family that wore mismatched clothes. Like, you know, that would be a totally different
and then
story.
all the other kids are all like this.
Yeah.
Like, I agree.
I think that would be a total, like, that would be an issue if that was what it was. But I think because the family is diverse in that way, and
I agree.
Good point.
Okay. That makes it okay.
I agree with that.
I don't know. I think that like our money question is still like
A good question.
a good one. I just think that like there's some, you know, support to like the different races.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely good in it.
We want to talk about our books, like really quick, our folklore books that we brought, or that we talked
We have
about.
8 minutes.
Yeah. I can talk about mine really quick just because it's super
I can talk about mine super quick too.
So mine is like why mosquitoes buzz in people's ears, and it's it's retold. It's a West African, West African folklore that's retold by this author and everything. And pretty much what happens is that this mosquito is kind of has like a chip on his shoulder, so bugs the iguana, and the iguana puts sticks in his ears and then scares the snake, and then the snake does this, and then this happens, and then it all goes down to this owl whose baby was killed because the monkey was scared, and it goes back down to the mosquito. And so they have to, and then the owl is like, well, I don't want the sun to come, and she calls the sun every morning to like rise up, because, you know, owls are nocturnal. And anyway, so it's kind of a cool story because the king, the lion, has to figure out like why the owl is doing this, and then every time he goes back, it's like, well, the snake did this, and then he goes to the snake and said, why did you do this? And this, well, because of this animal, and like keeps going on.
Chain.
And the cool thing is, as I was reading this, I was like, well, this isn't really like this doesn't do anything for me. Like, it's not really a whole lot of message takeaway. Like, I could really deeply analyze it. It was pretty basic, and it was more of like a pattern book, I felt like. But what I realized and what I connected it to was the TED Talk with the single story, and how just like, the owl was like, well, I'm not putting the sun up because the monkey killed my baby, and was really mad at the monkey. Well, but she didn't know the whole story, and so
That's
like it was kind of just like this, like
the great like
she only
for that.
Yeah, she only knew the single story, and then the lion, like the king, was the only one who could see the full story unravel. And it was like the king who went to the owl and said, look, here's what happened, and told the whole story of it. And she's like, oh, okay. And then like, had the sun. It's like, here's the sun for you, because she like didn't let the sun come up, and they were in the dark for days and stuff like that. So that's what I connected it to, was like that single story, because I loved that TED Talk.
Me too.
So much.
Cool.
Yeah. And I loved that simplicity of taking like on stereotypes in that way, and just like how, and like it's not just like in society, but like also literature, and like how vulnerable we are. To like
also something that came up honestly a few times. I don't know if it was the videos that I watched or if it was different things, but that comment of like, well, if I'm gonna watch the news and I see that there's a white serial killer, I'm not going to think that every white person is a serial killer. Right. But when you watch the news and you see like, I don't know, like a black shooter or something, then you're going to think that all the black males are going to be shooting. So I just like thought that was really interesting, because I was like, oh yeah, like you're going to think everyone who's white is a serial killer just because one person, but like that's what we do.
Well, it's like the headline thing. In Leticia's Nieto.
Yes.
Her speech, she talked about rank, status, and power. And she talked about how like the headlines, like what is in the headlines is things that we think are unfamiliar, or don't occur as much. But when things continuously keep being in the headlines, they continue to like become more and more of the norm. And all of a sudden those things are no longer in the headline.
Like everyone thinking that everyone in Africa is starving and dying.
Right.
I even think about like when I see someone that gets in an accident on the freeway, like I don't really think much of it, but then if it's like me a part of that, like if it were someone that I knew or a family member, then it would affect me in a whole nother way. Like but it happens so often, like car accidents, but you just see it and go by, or like an ambulance is going somewhere, you don't really think much of it, but I just connected that with like how there's always so much more of a story, and it's impacting people in ways that we don't even know, and so like just to be sensitive to that, and just like how we interact with other humans is just like that's like the norm, like how, and like we never really like take a step back and like maybe even look at somebody else and how they interact with somebody, it's just like I
was gonna say, I love that in response to all this, in your post you talked about Joy's concept of the ticker tape.
I was just about to talk about. Like the ticker tape.
I talked about that in my post too. I was like, I watched different videos from y'all, but I talked about in response to them as well, that one of the things that I've really held on to since that class is the ticker tape. Like whenever I like feel like I'm about to react really emotionally, I'm like, hold up. What am I thinking?
What's my ticker tape?
What's happening?
And I paid a lot of attention to that when I was taking the bias test. Because I was like, okay, the result is interesting, but it's kind of what I expected. But like what my thought process when I was taking that test, like the things that I thought, I like kind of like was like, oh, this is obvious like bias that I have, that I'm thinking this when taking it. Like for instance, I wrote it in my post, but like for instance, when we had to do like I did the race one, that race for black and white, and like you had to pick like a key when you saw a picture or a word, and you had to like match it up. So like at first they told you to match like all the bad words. You had to hit the same key as a white person photo, and then you had to hit like the same key for a black person's photo and a good word. And so I was doing that, and I was like, okay, like that's fine, like whatever, white bad, got it, like because I was like fine with doing that. But then when they switched it and I had to hit like the bad words to go along with the black photos or black people photos and the good words to go along with white, I was like, I'm being super racist right now, and like, and I was like, oh, that's so weird that like I like did that, and I don't know, I thought that was interesting.
That's so
I did the sexuality quiz because I felt like we talked about race a lot in this class already, and it was like similar situation, like match good words with phrases or pictures that depict straight people, and then bad words with people, like
and
phrases
did you feel awful about
gay
it?
people, and I was just like, I feel so bad.
But when it switched, you were fine.
Right? I was like,
Whatever.
I can diss on myself, whatever.
Well, it was really
So
sweet.
that was
like I gotta take it.
I
I
felt
know,
like it
me
was
too.
tricking me, and I was like, I don't
Right?
feel like I don't
they're
like
trying to make me
this.
so racist. Like, that was weird.
But you had already been like
Totally
technically
opposite.
racist.
Yeah, exactly. And then also I noticed that like when I was looking at the pictures to decide like which ones, like because it's a black and white photo, so you just you're like looking at features, and I was always looking at their noses, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting that I did that. Like, okay. Anyone want to share another thing? I also have my book.
Well, so I guess one thing was, did you guys watch Robin DiAngelo's?
I went to it.
Okay, I went to it too last year.
Yeah.
Like I think like there's so many good things about it, and I think so many of those resources and speeches and stuff you could just like talk all day on just one of them.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like I think they're just so powerful, and they're
so eye-opening. Like for me, especially, I don't know. I've just never had to think in that way ever.
And
stuff.
thought-provoking.
Yeah, it
like,
really is.
Yeah. I think like something that I really took away from D'Angelo's talk was just like the like who really does have the power. And we really talked about that, and going back to like, okay, who does have the power in this book? Like who
that was like tough for me to like pinpoint. I don't know, because I like
her and then the kids and then her.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, then the author, has all this credentials.
Yeah,
and
so that's what I ended up finding myself going to, was the author and like what their background was, and like they had the power in writing this. So like what made them have the power? I like thought like farther on
and
it.
then like the encounter one, like technically that author didn't have the power to write that in comparison to this one, like in Marisol's.
Yeah.
Like because he wasn't as what am I trying to say? The ethnicity, like he wasn't that race, he wasn't that. He didn't go through that. Like,
and I even went on to like the website and like looked at the author's like description of like why they wrote it, and they said, was it a he or she? I don't know, but
you said that because it was in celebration of the anniversary or something.
Yeah, that, and also like it was saying that
one is too. Oh, it's by
that like they had tried
the main character
to find someone of that tribe, but couldn't, and so like they stopped there. They didn't even like try to find someone that like was even half or anything like that. They were only looking for like full. And I'm like, well, obviously you said it yourself, you can't find that, and so like why wouldn't you even try for some, I don't know, someone that's even half or has the knowledge based off of like their own like heritage, I guess. So I just found it interesting that like they didn't really go beyond that. Like they were just like, okay, whatever, I can't find it, and like moved on to like their own perception of it all. So it's weird.
Well, it's just like, I don't know, I've never thought of literature with who has the power. Like,
no,
I mean, like you think of it in like a kind of a way when you think of like, okay, like what about the white dominance? What about the gender dominance? Like you kind of talk about it or like think about it, but not directly. And so to think about it directly was a different experience. I think, but I think we're out of time.
I have to go. Otherwise, you could
I think
go over.
pretty much
I think we
exhausted
can
everything too.
Yeah.
Good talk.
I think the power and privilege you could talk forever about. Yeah, go ahead.
Bye, Joy.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's really good.
Bye. See ya.